Welcome everyone to our monthly webinar. This month we are talking about loneliness and rejection. And I believe this is something that, touches all of our lives and something that I think is important that we talk about, especially, you know, I personally have felt a lot of isolation through the whole pandemic time, and I've really had to develop a lot of strategies of how to overcome that and how to find my way out of isolation and loneliness and rejection and find my place, find my community. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And Connie's actually going to be starting us off. So Connie, take it away.
All right. I too have experienced quite a bit of loneliness, rejection, and isolation in my life. And I think for loneliness, some of it's been pretty recent. But I'll share more about that as we go. So there's a lot of ways to experience loneliness, but three of the most common ones that I thought of when I was preparing for this was the loss of a loved one, when we isolate ourselves and feeling like no one understands us or can relate to us. And like I said, there's obviously a lot of ways that we can experience loneliness, but these three are really common ways that loneliness can come on. Looking at the loss of a loved one, it's not a choice. A lot of the time, it comes out of nowhere, or you know, even if we expect it, sometimes the day that it happens, it's still surprising to us. Two, we don't control the timing. Um, it's very rare to actually be able to control the timing of someone passing away. I know there's times when you have a choice of pulling the plug or things like that. So there is some control there, but most of the time we don't have control over the timing. A lot of times we don't control the circumstances. Um, and we don't control the outcome either. No matter how much we want to control the outcome, a lot of times we have no control over that. And that includes our own emotions. Sometimes it's an emotional roller coaster. And sometimes, some of those feelings or some of the things that we experience as part of that loss is part of it, is part of the whole experience. And it's not like you can control it. There were days when I woke up in a fog and I had no control over that. I had control over how I dealt with it, though. And number five, the only part that you choose is how you respond to that loss, or how you respond to some of the things that are going on as a result of that loss. So ways that people respond to loneliness. One, sometimes they choose to isolate as a response to loneliness. And I think a lot of reasons why people do that is because they feel like other people may not understand why they're feeling lonely, or why they're experiencing that. We're talking still about the loss of a loved one specifically. Sometimes people grieve alone and they choose not to let other people in, because it's something that they think they have to deal with on their own, or they feel like, once again, people don't understand, pretending like nothing has changed. So sometimes, instead of accepting that things are different then, and that person's no longer in their life, they act like everything is the same. They try to live life as if nothing has happened, and it's impossible because there's that missing piece. And so then it ends up being something that causes stress and anxiety. Um, and then, positive ways that people can respond to loneliness due to the loss of a loved one would be finding support, trusted friends, going through grief share. That's what I did. Pastoral support. I also had some of that, counseling, mentoring, and there's probably a variety of others. Giving it to God is another one. There's a lot of ways where we can respond to our loneliness. It's a matter of where we're at and how we're processing, which way we go. The second part of this is isolation. Isolation is a choice because we can choose to either be around other people or choose to be alone, unless it's forced on us. So during the pandemic, it was forced on us. We didn't have a choice. We had the stipulated people we were allowed to be around, and that was it. So most of the time, other than the pandemic, we do like isolation is a choice. But during the pandemic, it wasn't. And it caused a lot of people a lot of emotional trauma and a lot of like anxiety because they lost a lot of that connection. And it's still having its toll to this day. Um, Isolation may be the response to anxiety about being around other people. And so like that would be like social anxiety, like where you don't want to be around other people because you're worried about what they think of you or how they're going to respond to you. Um, you may feel insecure. Um, you may also feel like you're not in a place where you want to talk to people and you're just not wanting to be around other people. You just want to be alone. And number three, isolation can be a reaction to something that has happened in the past. So if something traumatic happened when you were in community, so let's use the example of like if you're at church and something negative happens, some people choose not to return to that church because it was so traumatic they can't bring themselves to return. So that's when it's a reaction to something from the past. Um, and I'm sure there's other ways to experience isolation. um, but these are the three that came to my mind when I was preparing for today. And so, ways that people respond to this isolation are some people make excuses to get out of social situations. Um, some people, they prioritize personal time over everything else. And you people need to use courage in order to face those social situations. So like one side is like to make excuses to get out of it, and the other side is to um, bolster your courage and face them anyway, even though you really don't want to be there and you have a lot of reservations. Just being able to do that and then allow other people to help you get out again. So instead of trying to do it all on your own, allow other people to help you. If you don't feel comfortable going out and meeting people on your own, call a trusted friend, calls a family member, go out with your spouse, let them be your social butterfly while you're just along for the ride. But at least then you're interacting with people. Uh, my husband, he's the social butterfly of our little person, and I'm not. So when we go into social situations, typically I will connect with one person and then we'll talk for almost the whole night. And he'll be the one going from person to person, having conversations with pretty much everybody. And so, yeah, we're very different that way. But I like going out with him because I feel like because he's the social butterfly, I have that safety zone to just connect with that one person. And so it's kind of nice to go into social situations with him. So the third thing that we're going to talk about in response to loneliness is the part of feeling like no one understands or relates to you. And this feeling begins with an incident and becomes a belief when it's reinforced. So what I mean by that is um, an incident will occur and either it's a misunderstanding or someone you've shared with them and they when they're telling you what they've heard, it's nothing close to what you've actually been trying to share with them. So then you feel like they can't relate to you, they don't understand you. And so the next time that you go to talk to them about that, something along those same lines, you just don't feel comfortable doing that, especially when it's happening with multiple people about the same thing. Then you start feeling like no one understands you. And that's when it becomes a belief about yourself because it's been reinforced by more than one person. And you start going down this rabbit trail of, well, no one understands me. I'm the only one experiencing this. And I'm sure all of us have had times when those thoughts have gone through our mind. And number two, it's a response to something that happens. Um, so instead of it just being an incident, it's a response to something that happens. So if somebody writes a text to you that shows you that they can't relate to you, or if you're sharing, about the loss of a loved one, for example, and they say something that seems really insensitive, or they just shut down completely, or they walk away, that's something that happens that makes you feel like they don't understand you and makes you feel like it's unsafe to share those things. It can also be a feeling, or this feeling can also become a negative thought pattern if we allow it to take hold. So if we keep focusing on how, oh, this person doesn't understand me and this person can't understand me, and so maybe nobody can understand me, and then that's what we keep rolling around in our head over and over and over again, then it becomes a stronghold in our life where we don't trust anyone with those kinds of things. And for me, when I lost my dad, I experienced a lot of this because, there are a lot of people at my church who didn't understand like my loss, and they said things because they didn't understand, not because they didn't care. They just had no idea what to say to me. And some of my close friends shut down because they had no idea how to comfort me. They had no idea how to help me. And I realized that I needed to find a safe place where I could share. And that's why I went to Grief Share. And it was amazing for me because not only could they relate to where I was, but they were my support system. They were able to help me open up in ways that my friends couldn't. And they understood the depth of my pain and my loss and my loneliness in ways that very few other people could. And so it was so helpful for me. And, I encourage you that if you're going through something like that, seek out people who can relate to those things. It could be a support group. It could be, like I said, a counselor, a mentor, a pastor, but it's important not to face it alone. You need to have people surrounding you. Ways people respond to feeling like no one understands or relates to you. There's assumptions that people don't understand or relate to you. And or like you could assume things or you could ask questions and investigate further. So like one side of the coin is the assumptions, the other side of the coin is actually asking questions, actually trying to find out why they're responding the way they are. And you might be surprised. When I did ask some of my friends why they responded the way they did, I was actually surprised to hear some things like one of my friends that totally shut down. It was because there's a lot of people in her life that are close to death and she's scared. So me sharing my thoughts of like my experience with loss was actually terrifying her, and that's why she shut down, but I had no idea until I asked. So here I thought she just couldn't relate, but in reality she just didn't want to face it yet. And so it's good to ask those questions and find out, because it can also help you keep those connections strong and realize that there's a reason that they're reacting the way they are. Um, the next point, you could allow these thoughts and feelings to take hold and withdraw from people entering into isolation. And this is what quite a few people do if they feel like they've been like they're alone in it and no one can support them, no one can understand them. They typically then withdraw, feeling like they're on an island and there's no one they can really reach out to. And it's unfortunate when this happens because even if you can't find a support group, even if you can't find friends who you can relate to. God is always there with us, and um he wants us to take everything to him. And sometimes when we withdraw, we even withdraw from him thinking that he couldn't possibly understand us. But yet he was a human being for over 30 years. He knows the pain of loss. He knows the struggles we go through. He knows what isolation is about. I mean, he prayed alone in the Garden of Gethsemane right before he was crucified. He understands everything that we feel. And if anyone could walk us through those things, it's him. And he definitely understands, and he can definitely relate to you. God is always with you. You are never truly alone. And this scripture so relates that. Psalm 73, 23 to 26. Yet I still belong to you. You hold my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, leading me to a glorious destiny. Whom have I in heaven but you? I desire you more than anything on earth. My health may fail and my spirit may grow weak, but God remains the strength of my heart. He is mine forever. And it's so true. Like, God remains the strength of my heart. When I'm facing those times of loneliness, I know that I can gain my strength from him. I know I don't have to face it by myself because he is with me. No matter how loneliness comes into your life, once it's there, it's difficult to move past it. Um, I don't know how much loneliness you've experienced in your life, but once you're there, like, it's like this deep pit, and it's really, really hard to change directions and get out. Um, and it feels like the more you're in it, the more you feel alone, the more you feel like no one could possibly be in that pit with you. You're there by yourself. And it takes a lot to turn it around. I think for me, um, it really took like God having to like pretty much smack me upside the head for me to realize that I needed to move past my loneliness. Um, and it was because I was not letting anyone else in. Right. So, I shut down with everyone, including my husband. And the only one that I was allowing to speak into my life was God. And even then, I was like hurting a lot, and it was not um, positive conversations. But at the same time, it gave him the chance to actually pull me out. And because I was still talking. And I would encourage you that if you are in that place, that you at least let God in to that place. I like Psalm 23 when it talks about he's in the darkness with us. He's in that dark valley. He is the light in that dark valley. We don't have to face it alone. So remember that. Rejection. There are two types of rejection. There's perceived rejection and real rejection. Perceived rejection occurs when we assume we're being rejected with words or actions of another person, but it wasn't their original intent. And real rejection is when someone is rejecting us by their actions or their words. And we're going to go through both of them. But there's one thing I wanted to make a note of, and that's regardless of whether it's perceived or real, we have the same emotions, we have the same feelings when we're rejected, regardless of whether it was a real rejection or whether it was just something we perceived that happened. And it's important to recognize that, because if we're trying to figure out whether it's a perceived rejection or a real rejection based on our feelings, we're never going to figure it out. And so make sure you recognize that, because it will make it clearer as we talk more about it. But then you're just not basing whether or not the judging it from your feelings, because your feelings are going to be the same regardless. So perceived rejection. The following list are some things we might perceive as rejection, even when the rejection isn't present. So not getting a response from a text message. It could very well be that the person didn't get your text message because something was up with their phone. They could have been out of range. There could have just missed, could have been delayed. Sometimes I've texted someone and then when I call them, it arrives when I call them. Like text me- t- technology is not 100% accurate all the time. Not getting invited to an event or party. It could very well be that the person didn't even know you would be able to come. It could be they knew you had something scheduled that day, so they didn't want you to feel bad that you wouldn't be able to go. You have no idea what they're thinking or why they didn't invite you. Um, Someone walking away when you say hello, they might not have heard you say hello, right? Um, Someone not responding to your email. Once again, technology isn't infallible. Someone not waving back at you. I've waved at people from my car and sometimes they don't wave back. And that's probably because they haven't seen me wave at them. And then I'm like, they didn't wave back. And then I ask them later, they're like, I didn't see you wave at me. I'm sorry. Right? You know, you never know. Someone walking away from a conversation when you join it. That is a common one, right? You know, you come at the wrong time, they're done their part of the conversation, they're off to do something. They don't even recognize that they're doing it at the moment you arrive on the scene, and yet you're feeling rejected by it. Or someone forgetting your birthday, you know, I just forgot my brother's birthday. And it's so funny because as I was doing this, I was like, I forgot to say happy birthday. So as I'm doing this, I'm texting him saying, I am so sorry. And he's like, it's okay. Thanks for the belated birthday wishes. So, you know, it's not that I didn't care. The day that his birthday happened, I had so much going on. I barely had time to breathe. And so I was like, he totally understood. So, you know, if somebody forgets your birthday, it may not be because they don't care. Sorry for coughing. Someone missing a scheduled meeting with you. Um, that one could be because they didn't schedule it on their calendar, or they accidentally double scheduled themselves and forgot, or they wrote down the wrong time, right? And so they see you an hour later because they thought that was the real time, right? You never know what could be happening. So how to deal with these perceived rejections? So one, like the most important thing is ask questions. Find out what's really going on. Don't just assume that you know. Like I just did with all of those. There was multiple reasons that could have been in the background for what's going on. But you won't know if you don't ask. And share with the person how those actions or words impacted you and see how they respond. So if you're like not wanting to ask questions, or if you think that they would be offended if you started asking questions, you can always just be like, so when this happened, this is how I felt. And see how they respond to you, right? Like their response will tell you a lot about their motives. Reach out to a mutual friend to see what they think about the situation. So if it's a situation where you're like really scared about offending them, you really don't know whether you should approach them and ask questions or whether you should share with them how you felt because it could like be a bad thing, or if there's already tension in the friendship or something, feel free to reach out to a mutual friend and just say, this is what happened. Am I seeing things clearly? Because that person may be able to shed some light, right? Don't do it in a gossipy way. Just say, am I seeing things correctly? Should I approach them about this? That kind of thing. Because if it's a matter of safety, you want to know whether or not it's safe to approach this topic with that person. And if it's not, then go use the other two options. How to avoid creating perceived rejection. So, we've talked about all these ways. So, how can we avoid creating someone else feeling like we've rejected them, right? In life, we may be careless with our words or actions. And in these moments, we may come across to others as rejecting them, even if that's not in our intention. Be aware of this as you interact with other people. We tend to assume first and ask questions later, which is why it's important to observe the way people respond to our words and our actions. So when we're having an interaction with someone and we do something or say something and their expression shifts, that's an indicator that we've triggered something. And if we are aware of it in the moment, we can right then and there say, oh, did I say something that hurt your feelings? Or did I do something that is hurting you? And then if they feel safe, will obviously share. If they don't, they might go, and shut down, right? But it's worth at least trying to, you know, be aware of how other people are responding to what we're doing, because it can tell us a lot of how we are when we're talking to people. And sometimes we don't recognize when we are being careless in our actions or in our words. And it's not that we're doing it on purpose. I think sometimes we just don't recognize what we're doing. Because I know there are sometimes when I'm like in a goofy mood and I joke around with people, but they take it very seriously and they think that I meant what I said. And I then have to apologize because I'm like, no, I was meaning to make a joke. I am so sorry I hurt you. Right. And this happened with my cousin of like quite a few years ago. We were playing a game and literally I thought we were just having fun with the game. So I was totally sarcastic, but she thought I was being honest. And so I had like, she didn't talk to me for months and I had to iron all of that out. But had I actually seen the expression on her face and recognized it, I could have fixed it that much sooner. But I didn't know for months because she had not been talking to me and I didn't know why. So Matthew 12:36-37 says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you'll be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. And when I read this verse today, I was just like, oh, that's hard. But at the same time, it gives me hope. And the reason it gives me hope is because I can be more careful in the things that I say. I can actively choose my words before I speak them. And it takes work and it takes um, intention. But at the same time, I think about how much more my relationships are going to be um, improved if I do this. How much more will I actually have a positive effect on the world around me? And so it gave me hope for the future. I was convicted by how I fail, but it encouraged me that I can change it. It's not too late. So, how to avoid creating perceived rejection? Here are some tips that we can go by. Following up with people who seem to withdraw from us, and especially if it's like all of a sudden, right? Like they're really close to us, and all of a sudden they're nowhere to be seen. That's a great indicator that something's up. Be aware of those around you and be intentional in conversations. Keep reminders about birthdays and special events. Communicate the reasons for not being able to attend an important event or function. Be diligent with returning emails and text messages. So if you're one of those people that's like, oh, they're not responding to my text, I wonder if they don't care or whatever, then all the more, then you should make sure that you're on top of your texts and emails, because you don't want to cause those feelings in someone else. And be cautious with the words you use. So that's referring back to the scripture we just read. what words are you using? Are they life affirming, right? Are you speaking life or death over the person? Like, are you careless with your words? Are you careful with your words? This is all things that should be on our minds when we're trying to make sure that we're not rejecting people unintentionally. Real rejection. So here are some examples of what real rejection is. And this by no means is the whole list. None of my lists today have been the whole list, but I'm just giving you some ideas to start you thinking. So someone ghosting you with the intention to end a relationship, whether it be a friendship or whether it be a relationship or whether it be, um, an acquaintance, not being given a part in a play, not getting into the school, college, or university that you want, someone purposely avoiding you in order to avoid rejecting you face to face. So that's a little bit different than ghosting you. It's when they won't even they'll see you across a room and completely go the opposite way and hide, right? Getting a no when being asked out by someone, or no, when asking someone out. When someone tells you that they want to end a friendship, when you're not invited to a party or event on purpose, not being hired for the job you interviewed for, or not being called for an interview for a job that you applied for. Those are some real rejection. When someone tells you that they don't like you, or when a customer service or salesperson passes you on to someone else just because they don't want to deal with you. Those are some examples of real rejection. So how do we handle real rejection? Because we do experience it on a regular basis. So the first thing is recognize whether it's whether it was justified, right? So for the work, school, and other things like that, if we don't meet the criteria that we're looking for, then they have a very valid reason for rejecting us, right? If we don't meet the criteria, then obviously we're not the right fit. And so the only way to deal with that is either we meet the criteria or we look for a different school or we look for a different job or we look for something else, right? Where we do meet the criteria. For interpersonal relationships, was there a shift in the relationship? Was trust broken? Have you changed or have they changed? Right? Because if something has changed in the relationship, then that's the reason behind the rejection and it could be justified, right? If the rejection was justified, accept it and move forward. Course correct if necessary. So, like I was saying about the job or the school, right? Course correct. If you don't meet the criteria, then find out how you can and make those adjustments if you really, really want that. Or, like I said, look for something else. When it comes to relationships, if trust was broken, you can course correct by restoring that trust, right? So it's just a matter of knowing what's going on and whether or not it can be changed. If the rejection was not justified, recognize that the rejection is more about the one rejecting than the one being rejected. What I mean by that is they've made a judgment about you. And because of that judgment, then they've made the choice to reject you based on that judgment. So, for example, um, I have this friend. When we first met, we had very little in common, other than at one point we lived in the same province, but nowhere near each other. And we were going to the same church. And so we both kind of wrote each other off. And, you know, it wasn't a malicious thing. We just didn't think we had anything in common. And then later on, we had dinner with her and her husband invited me and my husband out for dinner. And while we were sitting there talking, I realized that the relationship was interesting because she was a lot like my husband and I was a lot like her husband. And so all of a sudden, I knew how to connect with her. And we were like super close after that. Right. And so sometimes, even if you've started off being the one being rejected or being the one who's rejecting, there's ways to leave the door open. Right. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about first impressions and stuff, which that story was talking about. Additionally, realize that it's better to surround yourself with people who embrace you for who you are rather than chase after people who have rejected you. Regardless of the reason that they've rejected you, it is so much better to put your energy into embracing the relationships where people love you for who you are. They're your people of peace. They're your people. I've heard this term before. They're your tribe, right? So those are the people you want to pour your energy and time into. If you're chasing after people who have rejected you, you're going to be constantly exhausted and have no fruit, because clearly there's a disconnect. Clearly there's a reason. And unless that reason has been rectified, you're pouring a lot of energy into a relationship that's not going anywhere. Don't allow rejection to cause you to go into isolation. Not every person will like you, and it's okay. Trust me, I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. You're not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. And I love the fact that we're all so different in this world, right? There are people in this world that are meant to be in your circle. And you may not have met them yet, or you may not have experienced that yet, but they're there. You just have to find them. And it's interesting because I think the more that I actually give people opportunities to be that person, I find more of them. God will never reject you. And there's a couple of scriptures I want to share. The Lord will not reject his people. He will not abandon his special possession. Did you know that you're God's special possession? Because you truly are. And do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord will personally go ahead of you. He will be with you. He will neither fail nor abandon you. God will never turn his back on you, no matter what. So, how to avoid rejecting others? We talked about how to avoid creating the perceived rejection, but how do we avoid rejecting other people? We want to be people of peace as much as possible. So there's some ways we can do that. Don't judge people, especially at first glance, like I did with that friend, or I did with my husband. I know I've told this story before, but when I first met my husband, he was coming in for a interview, and he came in with ripped jeans and a t-shirt with this happy face that was like had a skull and crossbones, and it was just really weird. And it said, have a psychotic day or something. And he had an oily baseball cap on, and his hair was down to his waist, and he had cowboy boots on. And I'm like, who comes to an interview dressed like this? Like, seriously, you're supposed to dress up for an interview. And immediately I wrote him off. So then after his interview is over, I go talk to the general manager, and the general manager was like, Connie, how dare you judge a book by its cover? And I was like, what? And he was like, you need to talk to him. And I was like, what? And he wouldn't tell me anything else. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I find out later on that the reason why he dressed up like that was he thought he would be put to work right away. So he was dressed to go on site, wearing grubby jeans and a, old t-shirt and like a hat he could wreck. And I was like, oh, he came in dressed for the job, not for the interview. But I had already written him off. Like, it's just interesting how many times we write people off without actually knowing their story. Ask people to share their story with you. Once people share their stories, you have a point of connection, and it gets strengthened if you also share your story with them. And I didn't experience this until I was at a women's retreat. No, not a, yeah, it was a women's retreat in BC. And it was based on story. And the whole weekend was based around women telling each other their stories. And I was amazed at the depth of connection between everyone by the end of the time there. And I was like, wow, because you knew who they were. You knew why they were there. You knew what was going on in their lives. And you could literally pray for them at the place that they were at. It was amazing. It's so important to know somebody's story. Don't rely on first impressions. You know, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of times when you're meeting someone for the first time, you like put your best self forward, right? But that's not who you are 24/7. And so don't always rely on those first impressions because that may not be who they truly are. Accept people for who they are and don't expect them to change for you. And recognize that all people are flawed. No one is perfect. This allows you to be gracious and kind to others. And we're going to talk a little bit more about isolation because isolation is such a big topic right now. And it has been for years. And so I'm going to pass it over to Laura so she can take over.
Today we're talking about loneliness and rejection, and Connie shared a lot, and she didn't even share everything that she could in regards to those subjects. But one thing that I feel that is a byproduct of both is isolation, right? Because if we go through seasons, difficult seasons, and we feel alone, we feel lonely, we feel like people don't understand, or we've been rejected, whether it's been a real rejection or something we just perceive in the moment, right? Our natural inclination is to withdraw. It is to isolate. It is to protect ourselves. That is naturally what happens. And unfortunately, we don't always recognize it in the moment, right? It's often much farther down the road when we find ourselves completely shut off from people around us. And, those feelings of loneliness keep growing, becoming, like Connie said, the more you stay in that, the harder it is to get out of it, right? It's harder for you to trust people again. It's harder for you to reintegrate into community. And that's why we wanted to talk about this, because we want to highlight it. We want to become more aware of it. And even for myself, like Connie, we've come through a really difficult season. And I'm going to be vulnerable here because we're talking about this topic. I had to go and talk to, a group share group. Like my family didn't understand. I felt like my husband wasn't fully there to support me in what I needed. And even some of my friendships, you know, and it's not that they didn't care and that they weren't there. It was like, it just wasn't what I needed, right? They weren't in the same place and they weren't able to understand the depth of the grief that I was going through. And it was funny because even in one of our grief share groups, one of the topics we were talking about was, how, what is something, because a lot of times, like Connie said, when you go through loss, people don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They feel awkward. They don't want to mess it up. And so they also withdraw from you. And one of the conversations that came up in our group was about aftercare. Like, how can we support those who are going through significant losses? And one of the things came up was, some of the women were sharing how wonderful it was after they had lost their partner or whatnot, because, the community rallied around them. They brought them meals, they brought them encouraging words. And then in that moment, I was thinking, you know what? I didn't have any of that, right? I didn't have a single, and I'm not saying this to get empathy from anyone, but this is how I was processing, right? And, in that moment, like I didn't have a single person offer to bring us a meal. And, when you're in that kind of deep grief, y- it's hard for you even to get up in the morning, let alone make a meal for your family, right? And so it's like, you know, sometimes people just don't know how to be there for you or relate or support you. And especially, if you've always been independent and always had it all together, like they might just think, oh, they're fine, they don't need help. But we need to realize this not only on our side, but also on the side of those in our life, right? Who are experiencing loneliness, who are displaying signs of rejection, who are isolating themselves. And so that's why I want to talk a little bit more about isolation itself. And I found this quote and I loved it. And it says, loneliness doesn't come from being alone, but by being surrounded by people who can't understand you. A deep feeling of isolation comes when you realize that even the person standing next to you is unreachable. And sometimes that's how we feel. Like if you're going through trials, you're going through difficulties, you're going through a situation, you feel misunderstood, you feel like people just aren't getting it, right? You can feel like literally the person beside you isn't available. You can't even open up to them. And that's a really hard place to be. And, sometimes that hurt, that perceived rejection, sometimes in our heads, we rationalize, well, it'd be better if I just stay in isolation, right? Then I wouldn't feel this rejection or this loneliness. So I wanted to mention that isolation is not something to take lightly. It often indicates a fact that others feel alone and are struggling. So if you find that, like Connie mentioned, somebody who's, you know, been in your life a lot, and then all of a sudden they disappear, right? Or maybe you've talked consistently, you've talked maybe once a week or once a month, and then all of a sudden you haven't heard from them in 6 months. That is a red flag. That's a moment to say, whoa, why is this person isolating themselves? Why are they not, coming out to groups? Why are they not participating? Like what's going on? And we need to be more intentional about this because there's people hurting. There's people struggling and they're doing it in isolation. They're doing it in solitude. They're doing it in private and they're not getting the help that they need. Isolation is not a long-term solution for loneliness. And I know the times in my life when I have felt deep loneliness, I have retreated. I have gone into isolation, and it only made it worse. It only magnified the problem, and it only caused me to feel even more despondent about my situation. And so we can't, you know, go into isolation thinking that this is our long-term solution, right? We were made for connection. We were made for community. We were made to be in relationship with others. And so we have to recognize this. My isolation only magnified my feelings of loneliness. And and if others don't notice that you're gone, right? How that's going to communicate even more rejection to you. I remember as a kid, I felt like I must have been adopted or switched at birth or something. I didn't feel like I fit in my family. I didn't feel like anyone cared that I was there. And I remember there would be days where I would, think, well, maybe if I got hurt and I went to the hospital, maybe someone would come visit me, right? I also had other days where I would sit in my closet, just crying and being by myself and praying that someone would realize that I didn't show up to the dinner table and come look for me. And nobody ever came to look for me, right? And so when those kind of things happen, like in our hearts, sometimes we're crying out that someone would care enough to call, someone would reach out, someone would, you know, see that I'm hurting or see that someone else is hurting and reach out. But when that doesn't happen, that almost magnifies that rejection, that magnifies that loneliness. And I wanted to quantify something, which is that isolation is different than solitude. So sometimes, because I am an introvert and I thrive on alone time. And so sometimes people might, separate themselves for a period of time to have times of solitude, but then they reintegrate themselves into community. That I would call solitude. That's them taking time away for self care, for taking time for themselves. Um, but they're not stuck in that loneliness or rejection or isolation cycle. And so there is a difference. So just because someone hasn't talked to you in 3 weeks doesn't necessarily mean that they're struggling with isolation, but just have this in the back of your mind. Be mindful of it, right? And like Connie said, be willing to ask questions. Hey, I haven't seen you in 3 weeks. How are you doing? What's going on in your life? And they might be like, oh, yeah, I went on a 3-week vacation with my family, right? Well, then you know that they were taking time away for self-care. But, maybe their response is, yeah, I've just been going through a really difficult time and I didn't really want to be around people, right? Those are two very different situations and they need to be, handled very differently. So I wanted to give some suggestions on some ways we can help people who are isolating. Um, the first thing is we need to be aware, right? I think that in any relationship, if we're not present to the relationship and we're not, invested in it, it can be very easy for us to completely be unaware of things even changing. So, this is one thing that we can really work on. Be aware of those in your groups. Be aware of those people in your family, in your churches. Observe, are they struggling? Has it been a long time since they've come? You know, and pay attention so that you can notice if and when they do withdraw. And don't just assume that others are busy. And like I said, reach out to them. Say, "Hey, I haven't seen you in a while." You know, that really goes a long way. First of all, that lets them know that you're thinking about them, right? You care. And then it gives them the opportunity to share their story if they feel comfortable to do so. And and then you know what's going on in their life. You know how you can support, you know how you can be there for them depending on how they answer your question. And then another thing is do something intentionally that demonstrates to them how much you care, right? So if you know that someone likes a particular type of coffee and you know that you're going to be seeing them somewhere and you come and you say, you know what, I knew you were going to be here today and I just wanted to bless you with your favorite coffee, right? That communicates not only do you know them, not only were you paying attention, but you cared enough that you were going to go out of your way and bring that for them. And it shows that you really do care and you really are invested in that friendship. And take time to listen and have compassion for them. A lot of times when people are struggling with loneliness and rejection, they don't have anyone to talk to. And it's not that they need you to fix what's wrong in their life. They don't need you to give them the answers to the problems that they're facing. They just need someone to listen and to have compassion and to care about what's going on in their life. And so be willing to do that. Another thing you can do is include others whenever possible, especially if you know that they have been struggling and you've recognized that they've started to isolate. Invite them out to things, invite them into your circle, have them be part of whatever's going on. Also, you can meet practical needs. And you can also celebrate them and help them see their value and that, it matters that they're there, right? This quote from Jeanette LeBlanc says we were not meant to live in isolation, not in nuclear families or a bubbled existence. The richness of life is found in community, in cooperation, and in becoming part of a greater whole. Expand your bubble, drop your shield, invite love in, and don't attempt to do it alone. And this is really a great picture of what I feel, everything that Connie and I have shared tonight um, needs to look like, right? When we either us personally have been struggling with loneliness and rejection and have isolated ourselves, or we know others who have done the same, the best thing for us is we need to be in community. We need to be part of something bigger than ourselves. We need to have people come around side us and support us and care. And, so imagine these things, expanding our bubble, expanding those in our life, drop our shield, that thing of protection that we keep in front of us that keeps us from being vulnerable with others and being able to receive from them. We need to invite love in, right? We need to be willing to let others love us. And definitely, we need to not be journeying this alone. So I wanted to address the fact, what if it's you that's been isolating? What if it's me that's been isolating? How can we deal with that? And I would say the very first thing that you should do is reach out to somebody you trust, right? It is it is one of the most important things, and it's probably going to be one of the hardest things you're going to do, right? Because when you isolate, you don't want to be with people. When I have isolated, it's because I didn't want people in my mess. I didn't want to have to explain to people why I was struggling, right? And we often isolate on purpose. But that isolation is only going to make things much worse for us. And so recognize that we need to reach out to people we trust and be very selective in who you pick, because there are people in your life who will cause more harm, that will drain you and make you even want to isolate more. Or there's those that will listen. They'll have compassion on you. They'll have empathy. They'll be able to surround you with the kind of love and support that you need. Those are the people that you need to reach out to. And then be vulnerable and honest. People cannot read your mind, right? And remember, we talked a lot about assumptions and judgments, right? You know, other people could be making their own assumptions about what's going on in your life. So, be willing to be vulnerable and honest. Tell them what's going on so that they can understand and that they can support you the best way that they can. Another thing that I like to do is realize that I'm not alone in this, right? I'm not the only one struggling, even though in my head, sometimes it's like nobody else understands. Nobody else is going through what I'm going through. But recognizing, well, maybe someone else isn't going through exactly the same thing that I am, but there are other people around me that are struggling. There's other people around me that I notice are isolating too. I notice there's other people that are hurting. And so if you're in that place, this is a good strategy to use. Look around you. Do you see other people around you that are displaying behavior of feeling lonely or isolating themselves? And try to be present in their journey. Try to be in their life. Try to include them. And as you reach out, you will feel better. Trust me. As I've done this, when I've been in like my pit of loneliness and despair and feeling isolated and alone, I've girded myself up and I've looked around in my life of who else was struggling, and I've reached out to them and I've poured encouragement and love into them, and that actually helped me. That actually brought me out of a lot of the things I was feeling, right? And It's amazing how that can happen when we pour out to others, even in our lack, we seem to get filled. Another thing I would recommend, which Connie shared, was to spend more time with God. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. He understands exactly what you're going through, and he knows exactly what you need. And go to him for comfort. In fact, I would say that's probably one of the most important things you can do. The very first thing you should do is go to God, right? Pour your heart out before God and then wait on him. Listen for what he's going to say to you, how he wants to pour truth into you or speak encouragement to you. You know, even if everyone else abandons you, God will always be there for you. Another thing to recognize is be mindful of your thoughts, right? When we're in that place of loneliness and rejection, we have a whole lot of negative thoughts that bombard us and are often the catalyst and the root to why we're struggling in the first place. And so be mindful of your thoughts, be aware of your negative mindsets, and ask God to help you replace them with the truth. Right? A lot of my darkest times in my life, when I've had God bring me through them and show me the truth, they were all based on a lie, or they were all based on some kind of misconception. And so be mindful of what you're thinking. Actually pay attention to the thoughts that you're having in these times of loneliness and isolation. Another good thing is go outside, go be active, have the sun actually shine on your face. You'd be amazed at how much vitamin D will do for you when you're actually feeling lonely. And that's actually helped me a lot when I've been in that state, is just literally going outside, going for a walk in the mountains. And there's something about being in nature. There's something about being in creation and being, in the sun that just seems to really shift things for me. And I believe it would for you as well. And like we've mentioned a few times, God will never leave you or forsake you. Even when those in your life do, even when you have actually been rejected by those in your life, when you've had some of the most brutal betrayals happen to you, rejections happen to you, abandonment. I know those things happen. They've happened to me. Even when that happens, know that God will never fail you. He will never leave you. When you feel isolated, draw closer to God. Share your emotions with him and have him help you sort it out. Read your Bible and find God comfort in God's words. And some ways you can connect with God is through worship, journaling, soaking, reading your Bible, listening to sermons. But get connected with God. He's gonna be the one who can help you sort through the mess that you're in. And I want to leave you with this scripture, Isaiah 41, 9-10. I said, "You are my servant. I have chosen you, and I have not rejected you. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." So as we close here today, we're just going to do a activation. And the reason I chose this activation today was very intentionally, because when we went through the pandemic a few years ago and we were told we needed to isolate ourselves and be alone at home, it actually did a significant toll on me. And after about 8 or 9 months of it, I was really starting to feel quite isolated. I was starting to feel very hopeless about a lot of things in my life. I was feeling completely disconnected from people. And I remember I believe it was November or December, and Holy Spirit prompted in my heart to connect with my sister. And my sister and I, growing up, didn't have the closest of relationships. My sister, Connie, she's 5 years older than me. She went off to college. Our paths really didn't connect. She moved to BC. I lived here. We would talk a couple times a year, chit chat at family gatherings, but we really didn't know each other. And when God prompted me to reach out to her in my time of isolation, you know, I kind of fought with God for a little while and then I knew he wouldn't relent. And so in my head, I was rationalizing, she's not going to want to talk to me. What are we going to talk about? We don't know each other. Like, how awkward is this going to be? Right. And so I remember the day I called her up and I said, hey, would you be willing, and even the way I presented it, it was so awkward. I said, would you be willing to like talk with me on the phone for like an hour a week just for us to connect? And her answer was, oh yeah, sure, that'd be great. And I was like, what? And so we did. We started connecting once a week. And at first it was just, how are you doing? What's going on? And we talked about surface things. But then slowly we started connecting. We started to get to know each other. And that started to morph into, you know, us encouraging one another, us praying for one another, and then allowing us to start dreaming again. And, something happened in that relationship. A bond formed between my sister and I that I am forever grateful for. And, you know, without her support and without her in my life, I wouldn't be where I am today. We wouldn't be having this webinar today. I wouldn't be an author today. Everything that has happened in the last 4 years wouldn't have happened had I not walked in obedience to God in my time of isolation and been willing to be vulnerable and open myself up to the potential of a relationship with someone that I knew, right? And I was very isolated. And so that's what our activation is about. Community matters. We all need people in our life that will walk with us through the thick and thin. No matter what's happening in our life, they're going to be there. They're going to support us. They're going to pray for us. They're going to encourage us. They're going to recognize when we're not doing well. They're going to see when we're isolating and they're going to say, hey, what's going on? We need those people in our life. And so for the next 5 minutes, as Connie plays some music, I just want you to just take some time and evaluate your relationships. Do you have any significant friendships? And have you been transparent and authentic with these people? How often do you spend quality time together? And do you guys hold each other accountable and challenge each other when you know something's not right? And if you have that person, then I want you to think about how you can deepen that connection. Maybe you're meeting once a month. Maybe you need to make that more frequent. Maybe you need to be meeting once a week. Maybe you need to be meeting once every 2 weeks. But really consider how you can create the safety net for yourself of connection so that you don't fall into this trap of isolation when you feel lonely or you feel rejected in a specific moment. Because, now I know no matter what's going on in my life, I can come to my sister and I can say, oh my gosh, I need someone to just listen. And I can unburden myself to her. And she does the same to me, I believe. And we all need somebody like that in our life so that they'll be there. They'll recognize when we're not doing well. They'll be able to come and give us the support that we need. And so, and if you don't have anyone like that in your life, then I want you to consider, who could that person be for you? And how can you prioritize connecting with them? And it might feel awkward, like it did for me when I approached Connie. But I can tell you this, it is worth it. to have people in your life that will be there no matter what, that will support you through the thick and thin, who will be able to be there in your darkest times and help encourage you and help you process through those so much easier. And so, Connie, if you could just put some music on for about 5 minutes as we just kind of consider these questions. All right. Uh, as we close up today, we just want to go over some key points to remember. The first one is loneliness can creep into our lives. We might not control the circumstances that cause it, but we can control our response. We can choose to embrace relationship rather than run from them. Number two, rejection is part of life. We're not going to like every person we meet, and they're not going to necessarily like us. We need to focus on the people of peace and the people that really truly care about us. And number three, isolation is truly a choice. If we recognize that, it means that we can make a better choice and reach out to people in our lives so that we are not experiencing loneliness. And also vice versa. We can reach out to those that are in isolation so that they don't have to experience loneliness. And this quote, the pain of loneliness and rejection can be a powerful catalyst for growth, pushing us to discover strength and resilience within ourselves. So no matter where you find yourself today, know that there is hope. You can push through this. You can take the courage and have the boldness to reach out and to grow from this and to actually become stronger because of it.
Yeah. So next month is a webinar that's based on my book, and I'm not going to obviously teach the whole thing, but I'm going to take some key concepts from the book and I'll be teaching on those. And it's about transforming the broken heart from embers to radiance. It's basically about how to come out of feeling unlovable and how to actually be able to receive love again. And so we're going to touch on that next month on April 3rd. So you're welcome to join us, and I'd love to see you there.
I also want to remind everyone that we have our next Kingdom Business Builders Collective coming up on March 18th. We'd love to have you join us. The address is on the screen. You can also register on our website at nosafoundation.com, and there will be more details there as well. As always, we have our online store. It runs year round. From time to time, we do upload new items, and we also have on there some of the remaining items from the Christmas auction that did not sell. So if you are curious and you want to check it out, remember that all proceeds from the online store go directly to No One Stands Alone Foundation and helps to fund a lot of the programs that we run year long. We have we extended the registration for our ambassadors for the 100 Pledge Project till today. So if you were of interest of wanting to help us fundraise by asking, sharing the vision and mission of No One Stands Alone with your friends, your families, your colleagues, those at your churches, and raise funds for the NOSA Foundation. We would love to have you partner with us as an ambassador. You can also find the application or the registration form for that on our website at nosafoundation.com. And we hope that you would join us in that as well. And last but not least, if you like to listen to things on the go, Connie and I release 2 podcasts a month, and they're usually related to a similar topic that we share in our webinars. But we get to just share more conversational style, share a lot more of our personal journey, share some of our own stories. And so we love to have you join us there as well. So you can check us out on the NOSA Unleashed podcast. And if you ever need any support or you want to contact us, you can reach us at nosafoundation.com, and all of our information is there. Also, all of our past webinars, all of our other content, and also upcoming events